It turns out that airports get pretty weird in ways that you would not expect. Some of these defy so many rules that I thought existed or were just so weird that I wonder how we even got to this point. So here are some of the weirdest airports known to man. And we're starting off on Madeira, an island off the coast of Africa that is owned by Portugal for some reason. In the 60s, the island was booming in tourism, but it had a problem. The island's airport's runway was very short, meaning only small planes could land on it. But they didn't give up. They extended the runway with this bridge. Like, since when was that an option? To my knowledge, no other airport has this, and there's probably a really good reason for that. Like, just imagine how loud it is under that bridge when a plane lands. You've probably been under a highway bridge before, and that's pretty loud. But we're not dealing with little Civics and Corollas. No, we're dealing with Boeing 737s, which are way heavier and louder. Now imagine you get buried under a runway. No, that's actually a thing. At Savannah Hilton Head Airport in Georgia, there are 2 graves on the airport's busiest runway. You're not supposed to step on people's graves, let alone land an aircraft on one. The reason this exists is because that runway used to be shorter. As I've said, short runways mean only small planes. But unlike Madeira Airport, which is built on a mountain, Savannah Hilton Head Airport was built on the flattest of Georgian soil, allowing for the easiest of expansions. There was just one problem. The new runway would go right through a cemetery. In Georgia, you need consent from relatives before your coffin can be moved. The airport got consent for all but 2 of the graves, since the graves could be moved, and now you see where this is going. And next on the list of extremely unusual runways is the airport of Macau. The airport looks normal until you try to look for the runway and realize it's way over there. The whole runway is built on reclaimed land from the ocean, which isn't actually uncommon, but I think the shape of this particular airport is pretty wacky, and that's why it's on this list. There are many airports partially or fully built on reclaimed land, including Boston Airport, London City, Hong Kong, Incheon, just to name a few. However, one country is the king of airports built on reclaimed land, Japan. Many of the country's main airports are built on water. Why? Just look at Japan. Where else are you going to build the airport? The most famous one of these is Kansai Airport, which has sunk 38 feet since it opened, giving it the award for the second most concerning sinking problem at an airport. Building an airport on water allows for quite a large canvas. Some airports don't have that luxury. The shorter you make a runway, the more dangerous it is to land on. If you can't slow down quick enough at Francis Courchevel Airport, you and your plane will plunge down a massive mountain. If you do that at Nepal's Lukla Airport, your plane will plunge into a massive mountain. And if you do that at Saba Islands Airport, you will become the next Sully Sullenberger. On the contrary, the Chinese Himalayas are actually home to some of the longest commercial runways in the world. This is because they are located in areas where the air is very thin, and as a result, there is less air slowing the planes down, so they need longer to stop. The longest one is currently located at the Shigatse Peace Airport, and it's over 16,000 feet long. And speaking of runways, Gibraltar Airport has quite an odd one as well. The runway intersects with traffic. Look at this. If you run red lights, do not go to Gibraltar. Actually, upon researching this video, I did find that they built a tunnel under the runway back in 2023, so now it's actually a pretty normal airport. Not to worry, as planes taking off at New Zealand's Gisborne Airport may have to wait for a train that periodically crosses the runway. I guess when you're out of room, you invent more room, even if it means you have to build a runway over railroad tracks. Now, it's pretty common for airports to have multiple runways, though usually those runways are parallel to each other to allow multiple planes to take off or land at once. Airports may have 2 intersecting runways that allow for operations in different wind conditions. Some, like Boston, have 3 sets of intersecting runways, but this random municipal airport I found in New Mexico, Truth or Consequences Airport, has, well, a lot of intersecting runways. This airport has 5 runways that all intersect each other. I have a lot of questions. First of all, who decided that was a good idea? Only one of the runways is paved, and this is a municipal airport. Municipal. Most municipal airports have 1 runway, and here you are with 5. Speaking of weird layouts, the US has quite a few weirdly laid out airports like Boston or Chicago O'Hare with its 8 runways, but Chicago Midway is also a pretty weird one. On this channel, I've talked about this airport a few times because of how weird it is today, but I've never talked about how weird it used to be. Yes, it gets weirder. The airport used to look like this. It was built like a garden fence. This is such a weird airport. The airport is actually pretty close to downtown Chicago. Typically, you wouldn't build an airport that close to the downtown of the city as they take up space and are very loud. That's why airports like Denver and Narita are so far away from their city's downtown. Some airports like Boston defy this and are very close. A famous example is Sao Paulo Congonhas. When you depart from this airport, you are very close to buildings, and there is zero margin for error, so when you fly to Sao Paulo, consider what airport you're flying to. Very carefully. No, it's probably fine. Anyway, speaking of airports that are super close to their city, the old Hong Kong airport, Kai Tak. The airport no longer exists, but when it did, well, just look at these pictures. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? Do I need to say why this airport no longer exists? Do I need to say anything further? No, I didn't think so. Let's move on. And move on to an airport that I have brought up 5 times in this video for different reasons. The airport is so weird, in fact, that when I asked a pilot for FedEx what the dumbest airport was, he said this one. This is Boston Logan International Airport. I have so much to say. First of all, these runways, is that 3? No, 4 different directions? Looking at Boston windrows, that was not necessary at all. Also, this runway up here is 2,500 feet long. No one's landing on this, so what's it for? And this runway down here, it's so close to being parallel, but it isn't. The airport was actually built on mostly reclaimed land, so you could have made it parallel. This layout is quite dangerous, and if you look at the runway incursions that could happen, I feel bad for the ATC. Now we're going to move on to an airport that I've wanted to visit for a while. The airport on St. Martin Island has this approach that goes right over a beach. That'd be cool to watch. If you're on this island, go plane spotting. I do not care about your ears. Now, if you've ever flown, you probably have landed on a paved runway. This next airport doesn't have paved runways or dirt runways or, well, runways. At Scotland's Barrow Airport, planes take off on a beach, and the schedule is determined by the tides. Way to work smarter and not harder. And now if we've talked about landing on all kinds of runways, but we haven't talked about landing on ice. Yep, in Antarctica, there are no paved runways, only ice runways. Because just think about the logistics of paving anything in Antarctica, let alone a runway. If you fly to Antarctica, this is what you'll be landing on. Now for an airport that is famously weird and creepy, Denver. I've talked about this in the past, but basically, there are a ton of conspiracy theories that surround the airport involving the Illuminati, the airport's weird art, and the swastika shape of the runways. No comment. Denver Airport was actually built to replace Stapleton Airport back in 1995, but they weren't the first to try to do this. Back in 1975, Montreal released that Dorval Airport might not be able to support Montreal in the future, so they planned a huge airport called Mirabel.
Mirabel!
Not that one. Mirabel was to become the gateway to Canada and was the most ambitious plan for an airport in the history of Canada. But they messed up. They built the airport very far from the city and connected the roads so poorly that airlines just went back to using Dorval Airport, and much of the airport was wasted. The only air operations that the airport manages are private and cargo. But the funniest part about the whole thing is when a company called iCar bought a huge part of the airport and turned it into this. I mean, they saw an opportunity and they took it, and I can't blame them. And our next airport did something similar. At Thailand's Don Mueang Airport, there is an 18-hole golf course in between the 2 runways. But I have one question. What happens when you drive a ball and it hits an airplane?